and caregiving. And we hope you leave today with some new insights about some of the experiences that you're having in your caregiving journey, and also some tools. My name is Sarah Taves, and I am with the Idaho Caregiver Alliance. And again, we just welcome you and want you to feel comfortable in this webinar to either raise your hand or put a comment in the chat, or we'll have some time at the end too, I think, for questions, but want to make this as interactive as we possibly can today. So just a little bit about Idaho Caregiver Alliance before we get started. We're really here to help connect and provide, empower, catalyze movement to support family caregivers. We are the only organization in the state of Idaho that's focused specifically on family caregivers. And in our 12 years of history, we believe we've made some impact, but we know there is many more opportunities to support family caregivers. One of them being our delivery of webinars throughout the year, and then our caregiver conference. We do know that actions and positive movement forward occurs through communication, collaboration, being inclusive, and building capacity in each one of us. And that really guides our work through the Idaho Caregiver Alliance. One of our key initiatives that we host through the Alliance is our Family Navigator program. This is free, and it's designed specifically for the family caregiver. We certainly care about the recipient of care, but this Navigator hotline is really designed specifically to support the family caregiver. Again, it's free, it's telephone-based. You can get to us through a website, and that's here on the screen, or through a call, and a navigator will reach back out to you and schedule an appointment to learn a little bit about your caregiving experience, and then to begin providing you with a plan or some suggestions for how you can support yourself as a caregiver. So we welcome you to participate and or refer others to the Family Caregiver Navigator that you believe may value or benefit from that support. So today's speaker, we're delighted to have Annique Dayley, who works very closely with the hospice industry and works with caregivers across the lifespan. She is a chaplain and also coordinates volunteers for a hospice agency in the Eastern Idaho area. Personally, I was connected with Annique as I was a caregiver for my mother, and the supports and services that she and her team were able to provide were just instrumental in helping us thrive in the experience of being a family caregiver. And then Dr. Raven Weaver from Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, is another individual with deep understanding and knowledge and experience in this process of adjusting to life changes, which for all of us include grief and mourning. And she teaches at WSU at Washington State University, and her focus is on certainly working with older adults, but also families across the lifespan. At the end of this webinar, there will be an evaluation form. We'd love your feedback. There's also an open-ended question asking you to provide us with feedback on future webinar topics that you would like to see. And so with that, I am going to turn this over to Annique and Raven. And again, you're welcome to put your comments in the chat, or pose a question or save them to the end. We want to be here for you, and we'll make this as interactive as we possibly can. So thanks for joining us. Raven, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining, and thanks for inviting me. I live about 7 miles from the border of Idaho, so I feel like I'm basically, a resident. So I'm really excited to be here and to share with Annique our title, as you know, Moving Through Grief and Caregiving Tools and Insights. And so when we were pulling together an agenda, it's really hard to capture so much that we want to talk about in, 45 minutes with questions, but truly chime in, unmute, do all the things. We hope that this can be as interactive. But we wanted to start by thinking a little bit about the intersections of grief and caregiving, which you are all familiar with, whether that's personally and professionally. This is something that we all experience. And so we also wanted to highlight some different types of grief and loss, specifically anticipatory loss, ambiguous loss, disenfranchised loss, and shadow loss. In our society, we don't really have good words for talking about grief and loss with others, whether that's in our personal or professional settings. And so, trying to give some more language and concepts and just better understanding of what we may be experiencing. And this differs based on our stage in life and our lived experiences. And so, we do have a note about how children and adolescents may grieve. And again, trying to give more of a framework to what is known, but also leaving you with resources. One of those is how to speak the language of grief better so that we can be a more grief literate society and be able to support everyone, really. So, to get us started, I just wanted to highlight this quote. I use this a lot when I talk about end of life and grief and loss. So, there are only four kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need care. And that captures everyone. So we are all connected to the initiative of caregiving, and we are all survivors of loss and grief. And as a society, we need to normalize this more and become more grief literate to support each other through these shared experiences, both caregivers and while grieving. So, to hit that message again, we are all survivors of loss, and loss looks differently, but it is experienced in different ways, but it all is valid no matter what we are experiencing. So, to better understand the experience of loss, I want to pose a question and share as much as you are willing in the chat, but just think for a moment for you, what does or what has grief felt like for you? What experiences, what emotions, what physical symptoms, what comes up. And if you are willing to share just a moment, uh, we will we will see these shared experiences. So thank you. I see some coming through. Take just a couple seconds to think about this and share as much as you're comfortable. What does grief feel like for you? Yeah, dark void, confusing, conflicting, mixed relief and emptiness, deep sadness. Yeah, so whether you're just thinking about it or if you were able to share and reflect on that, there's commonality in this, but there's also a breadth of experience. And what I'm trying to get at is we come at this from different experiences. There is a whole range that have been captured in the clinical and practical literature, but we can kind of categorize them across this table of experiences. So feelings and emotions, but also physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, and spiritual. And you can see I crossed out symptoms. I once had a guest speaker join, and they shared, this was in a class of death and dying, and they shared how we shouldn't talk about grief as a symptom. It is an experience. It is an experience. And when we talk about it as symptoms, we might think and over medicalize the situation. So just being, holding that language, that normalization, again, it's an experience that we all have. So thank you for those who shared. It's a whirlwind. Yes, I see this. It's a whirlwind of multiple emotions, and this is all normal. So there are different aspects of grief, and it's different for each person. It's influenced by their cultural and familial factors. So we have to consider who we are talking with, who we are working with, and who we are. So there's a great range of emotions that are possible changes over time. It's unpredictable. There is not a timeline for grief, and it often can feel out of control at times. Intense, triggered by a wide variety of things, unexpected, unclear, perhaps thinking you're doing really well with processing, and then something shows up and you have this experience. So grief is a normal response to loss, and there may not be a definable end to it. That is complicated, and it's complicated when you think about how children then also experience the putting the words to the experience that they're having or the feelings that they're having. So, Annique, I want to throw it over to you for a little bit to talk just here about how we measure, how we think about finding out how different populations are experiencing grief and loss.
Thank you, Raven. So this picture is from our first Camp Courageous is what we call it. So this is a children's grief group that we put on for the children in our area. And we call it Camp Courageous. We kind of gave it a superhero theme because sometimes it's easy to put on a mask or a cloak and feel stronger. But beyond that, I like to tell the kids, you have superpowers. You get to choose how you feel, how you think, how you act. And so we really encourage the kids to think about what they can do with their feelings. So if you want to click to the next slide, perfect. So we pass out these emotion wheels, and they're age appropriate. There's the source down at the bottom there. They're free. You can get them online. And so we print these out and we hand them out to the kids to help them identify their feelings. And so depending on how well they can read or not, of course, they get to pick which wheel they want. And for example, we had one little girl, we went through our whole activity and then I stood up and I said, okay, how are you feeling about this? And she said, disgusted. And I was like, oh, okay. But what she resonated with was the little green emoji that looks like it's sick. And she had lost her older sister to cancer. And she said, my tummy is always upset. So even though she didn't really understand what the word disgust actually meant, she resonated with that emoji. And so we could build on that. But it gave her language that she didn't have before. And that's something at all ages, if we can identify like, oh, that's the emotion, that's the feeling that I'm experiencing. There's something that's very powerful about that. And like one of the comments was many feelings that I didn't know I could even name. And so these give us vocabulary, which is so important, like Raven was talking about earlier. We need to speak, have a better vocabulary to speak about grief. Most people in studies, they can say, they can name 3 emotions: mad, sad, and happy. So like just these very simple emotion wheels open up our vocabulary tremendously. So I would encourage you to use these or some other as you're trying to discover what it is you're feeling. And then as you're working with children, teenagers, other adults, recommend these things because it really is very empowering to go, oh, I'm feeling really aggressive today, not just angry, but I want to fight someone, and then you can go, oh, that's it. Or I'm scared. We don't talk about that very often, how fearful we can feel in grief. So thank you.
Yeah, and all can be true, and multiple feelings can be true at one time. But again, having more words and language for what it is we're feeling. Thanks, Annique. Yeah, so I want to highlight, and you probably know this, but just again to validate that the course of grief is really highly variable and individualistic. It is complex, it's evolving over time. There are signs of grief that may appear immediately after a death or may be delayed or even absent. And there's no predetermined timetable for completing grief. This is one of the biggest misconceptions of, why aren't you over this yet? So I have three phases that can help describe the course of grief. But again, remembering there is no predetermined pathway. And it's just important to think about as you're working with individuals of all ages where they might be in these three areas. So initial phase of grief may be shock, numbness, disbelief, and denial, while the middle phase, so a lot can happen in between there, is more focused on the anxiety, despair, volatile emotions, yearning, and feelings of abandonment. And then this last stage broadly is somewhat of a sense of resolution, of reintegration and transformation. Maybe the turmoil begins to subside, balance is regained, but grief is still happening. And so remembering this doesn't mean it's the last phase and it's done and you can check it off of your lived experiences. There are these three general markers are still really variable, and we have to try to have a framework to understand where people may be. But the human response to loss is complex, and it encompasses so many personal, family, social, cultural values that will make these markers look really different. Again, to validate the experience, grief is a typical expected experience. We will all experience losses in our lives. None of us will get out of this life without grieving and without knowing other grievers. This quote has been a guiding frame for some of the research that I do as it relates to younger adults and trying to become more grief literate and grief supportive, because not only did the pandemic really showcase some large losses in life, there were also losses of life. And we have to be able to talk about that and how it has impacted us as we continue to evolve and grow from the experiences that we have had. So, reminder, let's normalize it. Let's support each other. Let's ask those questions. Let's listen. Let's be a better listener for those who are grieving. All right, I want to use the chat function again, if you're so willing, just to think about for a moment, what are some of the factors that may complicate grief? So grief is not straightforward, but what might make it even more challenging to process? And this can be a loss of life or a loss in life. So thinking about what makes grief complicated. If you have some thoughts, factors that contribute, feel free to share them. Expectations. Yes. Thinking I could have done more as a caregiver. Distance. I think that could be physical or psychological distance. Timing of death. Having to go through day-to-day tasks, resentment. Yeah, ongoing responsibilities that interfere. We are more than caregivers. We are multifaceted humans that have a lot going on, and it's hard to fit it all in. What we could have done differently, family, discord, yeah, family interactions, unfinished processing. Yes, thank you. All of these are absolutely contributing factors. And that makes it harder to know perhaps where people are or what they are processing. Here's a whole bunch of other ones in case we didn't capture them all, but I think you hit the spot on. So when it may have been preventable, so thinking I could have done more. We talked about the family dynamics and thinking about timing. So unexpected death, sudden death, death of a younger individual, death of a otherwise healthy individual that happens because of something out of our control. At the bottom, perceived lack of support. So it depends on what relationship you have to this person and how society may view that relationship and whether it's valid and worthy of grieving for as long as one may grieve. So thank you for engaging in that reflection. There's so many more aspects, but what I also want to highlight today is just some of these different types of grief and loss so that we have more words for it, but also more frames to think about, well, what may be going on in our lives, in our clients' lives, in our loved ones' lives. So I just take a few minutes to go over the different types, provide a definition and some examples, and then we'll pivot more into some of the applied work that Annique does. Again, there's some more pictures in here, and as we focusing on working with children and adolescents. So, to get us started, anticipatory loss or grief is an intense emotional, physical, and cognitive distress experienced before an impending inevitable loss, such as a loved one's terminal illness. This involves a lot of mourning, coping with the future-oriented sadness, knowing that that sadness is going to take over even more, and preparing for life without the person. So, this is happening before perhaps a death has happened. So why is it happening now? But we recognize it is. So how do we process? How do we move forward with that? I pulled a few things from social media that are circulating. So it's good that there's some out there, but wanting to remind folks, it's okay to experience grief before they pass. That is very common to have that anticipatory lens. It's okay to miss them, hold on to memories, plan for after. It doesn't mean you're wishing that they are gone. You are able to still be a whole human and think about what life may look like or how it will change. Feeling relief after they pass, that was a comment in the chat, that mixed emotion, especially when it is in a high pain, serious illness situation, hoping that, the pain goes away. That can be a primary care goal. And then feeling this spectrum of emotions. So again, wanting to really validate all of these experiences. The mourning, the coping with future-oriented sadness, this is a roller coaster. It really can ebb and flow up and down, especially when trajectories of health and serious illness are unpredictable. We don't know how we are following or how much longer somebody may be with us. There are some potential benefits to highlight with anticipatory loss. It does allow for time to say goodbye, that intentional preparing for the goodbye, quality time leading up to a death. It allows for resolving regrets, whether that is you as a caregiver or the care recipient, and then clarifying misunderstandings. Families are dynamic, families are complicated, and so recognizing that if you are meeting people where they are, recognizing there's an anticipatory loss, it can help resolve some of that family or friend conflict that is just inevitable with human interactions and human relationships. Another type of loss, which was definitely alluded to in the chat, but the words for it is ambiguous loss, which is a type of grief with no clear resolution or closure. So this is often categorized by uncertainty regarding a loved one's presence or status. This was coined by Dr. Pauline Boss, and it involves either physical absence with physically absent but psychologically present. An example of this may be a missing person, soldiers that are lost at war, or in children that are kidnapped, or anybody really that is missing, and natural disaster victims when they have yet to be identified and found. Other examples of ambiguous loss in this type 2 is when there's physical presence but psychological absence. So a clear example of this is when an individual has dementia. So they are physically there, but psychologically it's more challenging to connect with them. This occurs with addiction and severe mental illness and coma. This may also be a form of the type 1 would also be a form of like estrangement from family members that no longer are in your life. They're physically absent, but they're psychologically there, but just not in your life. There's other types of ambiguous loss, though, that are worth highlighting. And these are not maybe talked about or validated as much. So infertility challenges, migration, divorce, losing a home, these can cause the same type of loss. And again, there may be less language to capture how we are feeling about a loss that is less discussed, less normal to talk about, but also just less validated in society. Pulling this back to the symptoms and the emotional impact of ambiguous loss, you can see them here on the slide. So difficulty understanding the situation, not clear. Why is there physical absence but psychological presence? What is going on? Not always an answer to that. Long-term, non-terminal sadness, feeling stuck or unable to move on because of this gap, because of this reality of lack of closure in a way. And then family roles become ambiguous with this type of loss, often leading to conflict and strain, especially when some members accept the loss while others don't. There's a lot in here, but wanting to again highlight that this is a pretty common experience of the ways in which we grieve losses that are hard to put a name to or less straightforward. This third type is disenfranchised grief. Grief is experienced in connection with a loss that is not socially supported or acknowledged through the usual rituals. Individuals experiencing this type of loss often suffer from suppressed grief, leading to anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. They may feel even more alone because they lack the social support systems normally offered to bereaved individuals. Some examples of this may be stigmatized losses, so those that are due to dying by suicide, by overdose, by HIV or AIDS. Unrecognized relationships that are less socially sanctioned in certain locations, death of an ex-spouse, non-blood related close friend, LGBTQ plus partners, just unrecognized either in their social circle or at larger levels. And then other losses, so the loss of an unborn child via a miscarriage, the loss of health, being diagnosed with a chronic illness, job loss. These are supported for a time, but then it's often get over it, right? Like move forward. You're taking too long to process this. These losses are real and need to be validated. I read this book last year and I'm going to forget the name of it, but essentially the same thing is happening in our brains when we have a loss that is of a person, of a life, of a loved one, and when it is a loss in life. For example, loss of health, loss of a job. The same neurons are firing. So it reflects how grief and loss isn't a shared experience. It's interpreted differently, but it is worthy and it merits the support of the social context, and we need more of that. Okay, so the last type of loss that I want to highlight, and I'm going to stop talking for a moment and show a quick clip, is the concept of shadow loss. So shadow loss is a loss in life, not of life. It's something and not someone. This concept was coined by a thanatologist, Cole and Perry, and it's really valuable to think about another word, another language piece that we can use to help validate the experiences, recognize the experiences that individuals have. So I am going to make sure the video sound works, and then I think it's like less than 3 minutes, so we will be right back.
Sometimes I just want what I want right now, you know?
I can't help but feel like I owe everyone something. What about the people that owe me?
Just send a Zelle request in the Chase.
I call this a shadow loss. A shadow loss is a loss in life, not of life. A shadow loss is any time a thing that we love dies. So that could be, here's some examples of shadow losses. Divorce. Your best friend ghosts you. You unexpectedly get fired. Maybe you get diagnosed with a medical condition that you're going to have the rest of your life. Those are shadow losses. Big deaths are what I call any time a human or an animal that we love dies. And here's the kicker. Our brains grieve shadow losses the exact same way that we grieve big deaths. It doesn't know how to differentiate. But the problem is, we don't have a word, until now, shadow loss, to be able to describe this experience. Now, the other thing about shadow loss is, let's say that I go through a divorce and my best friend goes through a divorce. Her divorce might have been totally fine, very amicable, not a shadow loss for her because she wasn't grieving anything. But let's say my divorce was devastating and came out of nowhere and I was a mess for years. The difference there is that I would say, yes, I had a divorce, but that was a shadow loss for me. And that tells you, oh, that was a shadow loss for Cole. Another way to kind of test whether or not you've had a shadow loss is if you have ever found yourself maybe confiding to a friend, saying something like, man, this would almost be easier if someone had actually died. Because when someone dies, everybody knows how serious it is, right? It's really hard to communicate to people how devastating something is when you kind of don't have a dead body to show for it or no funeral to invite people to. This is shadow loss.
I can't help but feel.
All right. So I think shadow loss gives the language. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't turn it up. If the sound was wrong, I have the clip in there embedded. So hopefully if you weren't able to hear all of that, you will be able to watch part of that on your own. But ultimately from shadow loss, this concept is a little bit more tangible to talk about. And, ambiguous loss, disenfranchised, grief, loss, those may seem too medicalized. And so having this concept of shadow loss introduced into our own language and our own terminology has the potential to support individuals understanding grief is normal. Their experience is valid, and the experiences and emotions they're having are valid. So we don't move on from grief, we move forward with it. And it's important to think about all the factors that have shaped us up to this point with a loss and how we then evolve from that. And each loss and each grieving moment and experience shapes the individual. And so we are continually evolving and different, and we can't put a timeline on that. I want to take a moment to think about why we also have to consider this for us as health professionals as well, because professionals experience grief with grief and bereavement. They're expected to just move forward, move on, move to the next person, patient, family, client. But professionals are not immune. This is particularly true for aging services professionals or end-of-life hospice care professionals. They're expected to perform through continual exposure to death and loss, often without adequate space and support to acknowledge and process the cumulative and collective grief that accompanies that loss. So learning about the health impacts as it relates to you, related to grief in the workplace, loss in the workplace, as well as taking evidence-based approaches and tools that can help organizations practice grief readiness is strongly encouraged. So having space, having people to talk to, being able to support individuals. This also is a situation that they may be affected by an end-of-life experience outside of work. And so we have to consider the whole person, not just the work life, but the home life and how that may then show up at work as well, even if it's not a primary issue at the moment. The lack of time and space to come to terms with death experiences over and over has a negative impact. This has the risk for burnout and true physical health impacts. So we have to address that. We have to start with professionals in the field now, but also those who are training and having, again, the conversations to normalize grief and loss. And ultimately that supports the patients and the clients that you are working with. So we want to pivot to talking more specifically about how children and adolescents grieve. We got a little bit of a preview. And again, this is hard to capture because there's no clear path forward, but we are able to identify some patterns that are evident among early childhood, middle childhood, and adolescence. So I'm throwing that up here for you to see some of the common experiences of grief by age group. So early childhood, there may be regression to earlier behaviors, magical thinking, and there may also be guilt over causing the death, not understanding those connections of what's actually going on. And part of that is because we use euphemisms, we use analogies, and we are confusing younger children who haven't fully developed their understanding when we say things like, they're in a better place, or grandma is sleeping. For them, they are logically thinking, well, I want to be in a better place, or I'm never going to go to sleep again. I'm not going to sleep this. I don't want that to happen. So there's so many of them. But thinking about how those are interpreted based on the developmental stage of a child, of the child grieving, of the child who may be sick, that's really important to think about what we say, how we say it. In middle childhood, anger, health concerns, and school problems are more common. The example that Annique gave about like my stomach always hurts, that is a health concern. That can be exhibited as, I'm not going to school because my stomach hurts. Then that contributes to some school problems. These are all very interconnected. And then in adolescence, they engage in more effective behavioral and cognitive coping strategies. They're a little bit more developed. They may have help-seeking efforts, problem solving. They express their feelings, and there may be more acceptance. But again, this is all very variable. So I have a few images here. Annique, do you want to share about how these came to be?
Yes, I would love to. So after we look at our emotion wheels, we have the kids either pick a body shape or a heart, and then they need to assign a color to whatever emotion they might be feeling. And one thing we talk about is like that numbness that we can experience as well. And so we talk about that before we do this. And these were just a couple of really great expressions of how some of these kids were feeling. The one on the left was a gal who, she was probably, I don't know, 14, maybe 13. She had lost her mother to cancer. And I loved how she did this image. So you can see she chose her emotions and then she picked her color and she did this basket weave. And just so insightful, everything combined. And so interesting to see how she expressed that. And then there's young man on the right. He had drawn this and he called the numbness that void, which is the black. But I also like where he put the gray. I don't know what this feeling is. And he could acknowledge that. And I think that's really, really insightful. So these kids can, if we give them an opportunity, they can communicate what they're experiencing. But when he talked about his paper, he's like, the void is creeping in. It's creeping in. You can see the gold is love. It's creeping into that. The yellow is happiness. It's creeping in there. The blue is compassion. It's creeping. Yeah, void is creeping in and trying to take over. And so I thought these were excellent examples. And of course, different ages are going to do it a little differently. I've got a couple more here. This was, another that some of the kids did. But if they're younger, sometimes it's just a coloring page. But this one I thought was really interesting, very descriptive with all the cracks and things like that. Anyway, this is a great opportunity, but it's not just good for kids. Like this is good for adults too. If you'll do this for yourself or the people that you're working with, you'll be surprised at what can come up in these. The other thing that's so good about like a group is that we don't feel so alone. We find out that we're not the only one feeling what we're feeling. One of the young young boys who came had lost his older brother, excuse me. His older brother had died by suicide. And when he tried to talk to his classmates about the loss of his brother, they didn't know what to do with that. And he felt really, really alone. And so when they came to our grief group and he met all these kids who had had some type of loss of a loved one, to death, whatever the case may be, he went home to his mom and he said, "I'm not the only one, Mom. I'm not the only one." And that's something we point out right at the beginning is everyone in this room has something in common. And so trying to open up the language so that these kids can talk about it. It's really important. So there's some other activities we do. I'll just show you really quick. So we do a mask, and you guys can get most of this stuff just on Amazon. So this is just like a paper mache mask. And we have the kids do on the outside, so again, identifying feelings and kind of colors, adding or connecting colors to feelings. What do I want the world to see? And then what am I actually feeling? So I don't know if you can see, but like here's the tears and things like that, as opposed to, oh, see, I'm beautiful here and everything's put together. But this one, they're like all these feelings just feel like they're coming out of me. And so that's what this was representing. Let's see. And then we did something you can see in this top right picture. We did scream boxes. So if they feel like they just need to scream, this box is filled with paper so they can just scream into it and when they feel like they need to. So that's another activity that we did. Well, this one was, this is what he wanted everybody to see. That, we were strong and bold, but on the inside, it was just a lot of different things going on. We also do what we call Guatemalan worry dolls. And these kids make these little dolls, and they can represent themselves or something that they can tell their worries to. This is actually a tradition in Guatemala. And so these little dolls that they made, and they can tell them their worries, and then they can put them under their pillow, and they don't have to worry about those things anymore. So these are all things that you guys can do at home. The last activity we usually do is we make kites. And this one of our social workers made, but what we do is the side that's going to be down towards the kids, that's kind of what whatever they want to decorate it as. But the side that will go up would be like what messages they would want to share with their loved one who has passed. And this is really cool. And then we go out inside and we fly them. And the kids are so excited when they get them up. And so there's lots of activities. If you guys have neat ideas or want more ideas on this kind of thing to do with children and adolescents, even adults. When I told our adult grief group that we were making these Guatemalan worry dolls, they all wanted to do them. So we did them the next week as adults. And it was really fun to do that with adults as well. So if you have questions or need ideas, you're welcome to email me and I'll share whatever resources I have with you. But Camp Courageous has been a really fascinating experience. And just as a side note, kind of to support some of what Raven was sharing earlier, I talk to people every day about their grief. And one thing that I hear so commonly is, am I going crazy? So that may resonate with some of you. You're not going crazy. This is called grief. And for me, personally, when I'm in grief, brain fog is a real problem. And so if you ever feel like you're alone, try to get into a grief group. Try to talk to other people who've experienced grief who will be vulnerable and honest with you about how they're feeling as well. Because all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm not alone in this. I'm normal. What I'm experiencing is normal. So, and I just told somebody the other day, there's no wrong way to grieve. Short of staying in bed for 3 months straight, hurting yourself or others, there's really not a wrong way to grieve. We're all going to go through that process. So I'll turn it back over to you, Raven.
No, absolutely. Well said and shared, and thank you for giving those concrete examples. As you alluded to already, just the ways in which we can involve the children is important. So and adults, I would again say this really is meeting everyone where they are. So including and involving them, making them not feel alone, encouraging their open, honest communication. And however you can get that, if it is drawing, if it is writing these words, whatever is kind of connecting with the client, the participant in the moment. For children in particular, it's important to understand their perspective, asking them, what are you feeling or what do you understand about the situation? Again, we use too many euphemisms and analogies, so there may not be truth in some of their thoughts, and helping them come to the clearer understanding of what is going on. Developmentally appropriate, of course. Providing emotional and reassurance and support throughout. So these types of grief, bereavement, grief support groups are critical, and allow people to come together and not feel alone. And then developmentally appropriate coping tools. And one other example that is often used, and this is one that's good to suggest for caregivers, a parent that is also grieving a loss. Maybe there are some books that can be used that are well vetted and recommended that allow people to, this could be anticipatory, so talking about loss and grief in advance prior to a death, but also just having more of that conversation, holding space for that conversation in a way that is comfortable and not putting anyone on the spot to process their own emotions. But again, putting it into a book, having it be a character, and then being able to come back to that, to refer back to those experiences.
Raven,
All
may
right.
I just show you one?
Yes, absolutely.
These are called ELF help books. That's what they're called, ELF help. And they're no longer in print, but you can get them on like a Kindle app or something like that. So this one is what happens when somebody dies. And this is going to talk a little bit about the funeral home, what's appropriate to say, how it's appropriate to act, things like that. I've got one, sad isn't bad. And the other one here is when your grandparent dies. And these kids are age appropriate for children, and they're just really great resources. There's lots of others though, so these are just some examples. Thanks, Raven.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share examples that always are popping up. I wish there was some repository that was online that could vet them and have it available. Maybe there is. I need to come across that though, because not all books are good. Not all books talk about it in a way that is appropriate or what we want to encourage to normalize the conversation. So part of that also relates to how to speak the language of grief. And this is, I think, like my last slide, and then we have resources and we will have time for questions. But speaking grief, it can seem as though after significant loss, people begin speaking a foreign language, that they are not understood by others, that we can't understand them. And those experiencing grief can feel horribly misunderstood, rejected, isolated. So it's important that we invite people to talk about grief and loss, have and hold that space. And the ways we can do that is first to be open to it. Most people avoid, most people hide, ignore, say we'll catch up later, instead of opening the door and holding space for that. They're usually afraid of saying the wrong thing, but saying nothing is worse than the wrong thing or something that could have been said better. We need to be honest. People who are grieving aren't always the most fun to be around. They're often sad, anxious, intensely angry, irritable, but knowing that we are still there is number one. It's foundational. It's important to open that space. The second piece about speaking grief is just to be aware of the fact that we live in a grief illiterate society and culture, and that we can improve it. We can do better and support people in different ways. There is a lot of research that's ongoing and writings on grief-related topics, but we need to be more aware of how we can show up for people and have a couple sayings in our back pocket to throw out instead of saying nothing. Being available to support them, letting other people know you're there and available and that you can provide concrete ways to show up and to take a little bit of their stress off. That might be, saying, hey, I'm at the grocery store. What's one thing I can pick up for you? Or what day are you going to be home? I'm going to come and walk your dog so that you can have a moment to yourself. Giving them specific things, not just saying, let me know, let me know, because that's one more, another pressure point for the person to have to think about. Also, not trying to fix them, not trying to rush their grieving process. Don't say you understand. You may have a similar experience, but this is unique to them, to their circumstances. And then checking in periodically, but not constantly. So finding what makes sense for that individual, not wanting to over check in, but also don't disappear. Don't avoid it. They are obviously thinking about life and grieving. And so how can we check in to support them? So with that, we have pulled together some online resources. Some are already embedded throughout the slides, which you will have access to. I've provided a few websites that have lots of writing and support. There's some you may have heard of, some books, some blog posts. Often I rely on podcasts. I feel like we're always busy and on the go, and so it's great to have a podcast to listen to. I just listened to this one, and it is fantastic. Put out by the Dougie Center in Portland. They have a whole podcast series, Grief Out Loud. So again, validating the grief experiences. For kids in particular, I like to have my college students watch this episode and see, how is grief handled for younger children that are watching Sesame Street. Definite pro tip, put it on speed because, faster because it's super slow, but watch it. Think about how it is talked about, what was done well and what could be done better. There's more than just one episode that tackles grief and loss, but this is one that I've enjoyed sharing with others. There's also lots of resources that are out there, and this is another one. It's time we reframe grief for children. So Kate's Club makes a moving and compelling case for the urgent need to reframe grief for children. The goal to create a world where grief is good, where there can be some more focus on the resilience and the experience that helps people grow and move forward with, not on, from the grief that everyone experiences. So with that, we have some time. We have 9 minutes for questions. Thank you for sticking with us and learning a little bit about grief and loss and resources and tools and ways that you can get more involved from the caregiver perspective, but also this is all relevant for you as a human as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, there we go. Thank you.
So it looks like there's a question in the chart, or in the chat, asking about whether or not to tell a 77-year-old developmentally disabled brother that this person's daughter has passed. In my opinion, if it's going to be more painful for him, and it's going to bring up a lot of grief, like from when your husband and your two brothers passed, depending on how he responded to that, it doesn't hurt for them to not know. However, to have that conversation, if you can do it in a way that will be helpful to your brother, in understanding that kind of thing. But you know him best. You know whether he can handle that or not. But we come across this question a lot with like our patients who have dementia and maybe one of their children have passed. Do we tell them? Do we not tell them? Some patients handle it really well, and others just they grieve every time it's brought up. So my recommendation in that is trust your gut, ultimately. But if you feel it's going to just be so painful for him, you don't need to tell him. It's not going to be harmful or hurtful for him to not know. Anybody else? I don't know if anybody else has anything to weigh in on there, but wanted to touch base. Do you have any follow-up questions on that?
Yeah, I would just add the focus on their quality of life. And so thinking about what they can handle, how to maximize their quality of life, may mean withholding that, or if you've shared it once and that was enough and they forgot, again, more so with the dementia situation. But yeah, I think it's variable as so much of this is, which is hard to give concrete feedback, but certainly thinking about what you can do to support that individual. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, other questions, comments, thoughts, reflections, feel free to either chat them or come off mute. We'd love to chat.
Raven and Annique, this is you've given me so much food for thought. I really appreciate the notion of in offering support to an individual who is in the grief process to be really concrete with an action versus just a general, let me know what I can do to help. I think that's really sage advice. And as I think about my own grieving process, when someone just was quite directive with, I'm coming over to help clean up the plants in the room, it was, oh, well, that's a great idea. Thanks. That really helps. So I think that's something I hope all of us take away and learn from. And I know I certainly have experienced the positive impact of that.
Yeah, that's something we like to talk about in our grief group, is that there are positive things that come out of our grief. We become better friends. We become better supporters. I've had a lot of people say, I thought I was a good friend when my friend's mom passed away. But now that my mom's passed away, I can see how much more I could have been there for my friend, or ways in which I could be there. So I think that's really important that we do find that concrete thing to offer.
And I think it's also okay to recognize we're evolving as our, own grief supporters. And so just that example, Annique, of, maybe calling up that friend and saying, oh my gosh, I have a whole new perspective for this now, or appreciation. I'm sorry, I did what I thought was good there. Now that I've had this experience, or, I wish I had done more, whatever, not living in the past, but just recognizing, unfortunately, like I've joined the club of understanding it from a more personal level. But absolutely, I think we do a better job at that at the other end of life, right? When somebody's had a baby, it's often like meal trains and thinking about that. So why can't we do that at the other end of life? It's part of the life cycle. There is a question, and Annique, you may be able to talk a little bit more about this. So the experience of brain fog. Could you speak more about that? I've definitely experienced it, as well as decision fatigue. So how to support individuals.
So just both. We get so tired of making decisions, and everybody's like, well, whatever you want. It's like, no, just tell me what we need to do. That's a real thing. But yeah, the brain fog, and Raven may have something to add to here, but our mind and our body are trying to process everything that's happened, right? And truly, we're just on overload. Our nervous systems are activated, and our brains are trying to process. Our hearts and our brains are trying to connect. Like, I know it here, but I'm not feeling it here. Getting that to connect, and so we're just on overload. We're overwhelmed with the feelings that we're experiencing. And so what happens is all the things that our mind and bodies are saying, this isn't the most important thing, that kind of goes to the back burner. So we're not remembering things like we normally do. We miss appointments. We run a stop sign, things like that. Like, things happen, run over a curb that we would never have done that in other times. Maybe we're overwhelmed to the point that we're feeling more irritable, those kinds of things. But this brain fog is real, and it comes when we're feeling overwhelmed, and our bodies are trying so hard to process everything that's coming at us. But this is the problem in our culture, right? So somebody that you love passes away. Well, you don't need to be in a rush about your healing and those kinds of things, but you have 3 days to take time off to handle everything. And we're going to have the funeral within 7 days. So you got to make all these decisions. And So not only are we trying to deal with our grief and the loss of the people who we've loved, but now we have to make all these decisions and we have to think about everybody else's feelings and all of those kinds of things. So brain fog is very real. And if you're experiencing that, try to slow down. Try to do a little self-care. Breathing, maybe some of you have heard of tapping. Grounding, being out, touching the dirt, putting your feet in the grass. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What are you tasting? What can I feel that'll help me feel more comforting? Petting a dog or a cat, something like that. Anything bilaterally. So walking, because that's rhythmic. Dancing is really good for you. You know, all these things can help. And even if they're not things you normally do, these are things that are going to help calm your nervous system. You release those chemicals that are being dumped into your body through grief and help you to feel more like yourself. Any other questions? That was a good one.
Great exchange and great information. Again, I just want to say a warm thank you to, boxing something. Now that's an idea. Yeah, good idea. Bilateral, active, very physical. Yeah. Thank you, Raven and Annique. Really appreciate you providing your expertise. Edwina will be posting the slides on the ICA website and send them out to participants. And then I think she's also just put the link to our short, very, very short little survey, post survey. We'd love to get your feedback and have you suggest future webinars as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate your expertise and willingness to share. Edwina, any other closing remarks that you have?
No, I echo you. This was wonderful. Thank you, Raven and Annique. And yeah, thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.